Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more unforgettable Western stories filled with love, justice, and courage. She was left to die in the blizzard, until the marshal rode back for her. The storm that took everything. The storm rolled in without mercy. It began as a whisper of wind across the Colorado highlands, a cold breath curling through pine trees and over frozen ridges. By nightfall, it had become a white monster swallowing everything in its path. Clara Whitmore had never feared winter before. But that night, winter had teeth. Her family's wagon train had been moving slowly through the mountain pass, hoping to reach Silver Ridge before snowfall blocked the trail. Clara rode beside her father, bundled in wool and hope, dreaming of the small schoolhouse she planned to open in town. She never saw the bandits until it was too late. Gunfire shattered the quiet like thunder splitting heaven open. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Snow turned red. Clara remembered falling. Remembered the wagon tipping. Remembered her father yelling her name. Then silence. When she woke, the world was white. Too white. The storm had begun. Her head throbbed. Her shoulder burned where she'd struck the frozen ground. Around her, broken wood and abandoned crates were half buried in snow. The wagon train was gone. No voices. No horses. No father. Only wind. Papa, she tried to call. The storm swallowed the word before it traveled an inch. She tried to stand. Pain shot through her ankle. She gasped and collapsed back into the snow. She was alone, and the mountain did not care. Miles away, Deputy U.S. Marshal Caleb Hayes studied the horizon as dark clouds swallowed the peaks. He had been tracking the Rourke brothers for weeks, outlaws known for ambushing settlers crossing high passes. When he heard distant gunfire earlier that day, he pushed his horse harder. Now the storm threatened to erase every sign. Damn it, he muttered, tightening his coat. If settlers had been caught in that pass, they wouldn't last long. No one did. Caleb was not a man given to hesitation. But even he knew riding into a blizzard could mean death. Still, he turned his horse toward the mountains. Somewhere out there, someone might still be breathing. And as long as they were breathing, he would ride. Clara dragged herself toward the shelter of a shattered wagon frame. Snow clung to her lashes. Her fingers were numb. She couldn't feel her feet. The wind howled like wolves circling prey. She pressed her back against the broken wood and tried to stay awake. Don't sleep, she whispered to herself. Her father had always warned her. In the cold, sleep was death. But exhaustion crept over her like a heavy blanket. Her thoughts drifted. She thought of warm summers in Missouri. Of chalk dust on her fingers. Of children laughing in a schoolhouse she had never built. Tears froze on her cheeks. I don't want to die here, she whispered. The mountain did not answer. Hours passed. Caleb found the wreckage by instinct more than sight. Snow nearly covered everything. He dismounted, boots sinking deep. Broken wagon wheels. Blood frozen into ice. No bodies. His jaw tightened. Either the survivors had fled, or they'd been taken. Then he saw it. A faint drag mark in the snow leading toward a splintered wagon frame. His pulse quickened. He moved carefully, revolver drawn, not for outlaws now, but for the fragile line between life and death. At first, he thought she was already gone. A small figure curled against the wood, barely visible beneath snow. He knelt, brushed frost from her face. Her lips were pale blue. Her eyelashes rimmed with ice. But when he pressed 2 fingers to her throat, there, a pulse, faint, but stubborn. You're not dying today, he murmured. Her eyes fluttered open, slightly. Through blurred vision, she saw a shadow above her. A broad hat, a strong jaw dusted in snow. A star-shaped badge pinned to a heavy coat. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. He lifted her gently into his arms. I'm not leaving without you, he said firmly, as if making a vow to the mountain itself. And for the first time since the gunfire began, Clara felt warmth. The long ride through the white hell. The storm was no longer falling. It was attacking. Snow lashed sideways across the mountain like shards of glass. Wind roared through the pines, bending them until they groaned in protest. The world had narrowed to white and shadow, and in the middle of it stood Deputy U.S. Marshal Caleb Hayes, holding a half-conscious woman in his arms. She was lighter than he expected. Too light. That worried him. "Stay with me," he said firmly, adjusting his grip as he carried Clara toward his horse. "You hear me? Don't you dare fall asleep." Her eyes fluttered, unfocused. Her lips parted, but only a weak breath came out. He reached his horse, Ranger, a powerful black gelding trained for rough terrain, and secured Clara carefully in front of the saddle. He removed his thick outer coat and wrapped it tightly around her, tucking it beneath her legs to trap warmth. The cold bit instantly into his own shirt. Didn't matter. He mounted behind her and wrapped one arm around her waist to keep her upright. "All right," he muttered to the horse. "Easy and steady." The descent would be worse than the climb. Clara drifted in and out of awareness. She felt movement, the rhythmic sway of a horse. A solid arm holding her against a firm chest. The smell of leather and pine and something steady, something safe. She tried to speak. "My father." Caleb leaned closer to hear her over the wind. "What about him?" "They shot." Her body trembled violently, not just from cold, but from memory. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I didn't find any bodies," he said, voice low but strong. "That means there's hope. Understand?" She didn't respond, but her trembling eased just slightly. The trail was almost invisible now. Snow erased tracks within minutes. The mountain had become a maze of drifts and hidden drops. Caleb relied on instinct and ranger's training, guiding the horse carefully around steep edges and frozen ledges. Then it happened. Ranger's front hoof slipped. The world tilted. Clara gasped weakly as the horse stumbled near a narrow ridge where the cliff dropped sharply into white nothingness. Caleb pulled hard on the reins, shifting his weight back. "Whoa, easy." Snow crumbled beneath them and fell into the void. For one terrible second, Caleb felt gravity tugging them sideways. Then Ranger regained footing. They stood trembling on solid ground. Caleb exhaled slowly. "That was close," he murmured. Clara's head rested against his chest. He could feel how cold she still was, even through layers. Too cold. They wouldn't survive hours like this. He needed shelter. Now, through swirling snow, Caleb spotted the dark outline of something ahead, jagged but solid. A cabin, abandoned by the look of it. Half buried, roof sagging under snow. But it was standing, and standing meant hope. He guided Ranger toward it, dismounted carefully, and lifted Clara again into his arms. Her body was frighteningly limp. "Stay with me," he repeated, kicking open the cabin door. Inside was darkness and dust and bitter cold, but no wind. He laid her gently on the wooden floor near the stone fireplace. There was no time to hesitate. He moved quickly, gathering old broken chair pieces and dry wood stacked in a corner. Within minutes, sparks caught. Flames flickered, then grew. Heat slowly pushed back against the cold. Caleb knelt beside Clara and removed her snow-soaked outer layers. Carefully, respectfully, replacing them with a wool blanket he found in a chest. Her skin was pale, her fingers stiff. He rubbed her hands between his own. "Come on," he murmured. "You fought this long. Don't quit now." Minutes passed. Then, a soft sound, a shuddering breath. Her eyelids trembled open. She looked confused at first, then frightened. "You're safe," he said immediately. "You're in a cabin. Storm's still raging, but we're out of it." Her eyes studied his face more clearly now. "You came back," she whispered hoarsely. He frowned slightly. "Back? I thought I saw you before I passed out." He gave a small shake of his head. "First time I've had the honor." A weak flicker of a smile touched her lips. "I'm Clara, Caleb Hayes." She looked at the badge pinned to his vest. A marshal. Deputy. She swallowed slowly. Why would you risk this storm, for someone you don't know? Caleb hesitated. He wasn't a poetic man. Didn't believe in grand speeches. But he answered honestly, because leaving you there wasn't an option. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just heavy with everything unspoken. Outside, the storm screamed against the cabin walls. Inside, firelight painted warm gold across Clara's pale face. She watched him quietly. You could have died. He gave a faint shrug. Still might. That earned the smallest breath of laughter from her, fragile, but alive. And that sound did something unexpected to Caleb's chest. Something unfamiliar. Hours later, the storm showed no sign of stopping. Caleb checked Clara's ankle, swollen but not broken. Her shoulder bruised. She would heal, if they survived the night. He offered her a tin cup of warmed water. Their fingers brushed briefly as she took it. Both of them felt it. Neither spoke of it. You should rest, he said. She looked toward the door where wind rattled the frame. You'll stay. He met her eyes. I'm not leaving without you. The same words he had spoken on the mountain. But this time, they meant more. Clara closed her eyes, finally allowing sleep, real sleep, to take her. Caleb sat nearby, revolver resting on his thigh, listening to the storm, and to her breathing. Because outlaws were still out there. And men like the Rourke brothers didn't like loose ends. If they realized someone survived, they would come back, and Caleb Hayes would be waiting. Footprints in the snow. The storm didn't end. It weakened. Which was worse, because when the wind died down, the mountain could be heard again. And the mountain was never truly silent. Caleb had not slept. He sat near the fire through the long night, listening to Clara's breathing and the distant groan of shifting snow on the slopes above. Every now and then, logs cracked in the flames, sending sparks upward like brief stars. Just before dawn, the world outside changed. The howling wind faded into a low whisper. Snow stopped falling. That was when danger could move. Caleb stood slowly and walked to the small frost-covered window. He wiped a circle clear with his glove and looked out. White, endless white, but something else. A line in the snow. He narrowed his eyes. It wasn't natural. It wasn't drifted. It was disturbed. Tracks. Horse tracks. Fresh. His jaw tightened. They found the trail, he muttered under his breath. Behind him, Clara stirred. She pushed herself upright slowly, wincing at her ankle. What is it? He didn't lie. We're not alone on this mountain. The fear that crossed her face wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, the kind that settles deep. The bandits. He nodded once. They likely rode back to make sure no one survived. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. If they see smoke, they will, he finished calmly. He didn't panic. Caleb Hayes was not a man who panicked, but he moved quickly. He doused the fire partially, leaving only enough embers to keep warmth alive without sending heavy smoke through the chimney. Then he checked his revolver. 6 rounds. He reached into his saddlebag. 12 more. Not enough for a long fight, but enough for the right one. He turned to Clara. Can you stand? She nodded bravely, then tried. Pain shot up her ankle, and she grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. Caleb was beside her instantly, one arm firm around her waist. You don't have to be brave every second, he said quietly. Her breathing trembled, but her chin lifted slightly. I don't want to be helpless. You're not. He looked at her seriously. You survived a blizzard alone. That's not helpless. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, strength, maybe. Or belief. Then, a sound. Distant. Hoofbeats. Slow. Deliberate. Clara's breath caught. They're here. Outside, 3 riders emerged from the thinning morning mist. The Rourke brothers. Samuel Rourke, tall, narrow-eyed, cruel. Elias, broader, silent, watchful. And the youngest, Tom, nervous but eager to prove himself. Samuel studied the cabin. Smoke, he said simply. Tom shifted in his saddle. You think someone's inside? Samuel's lips curved. I don't leave ghosts behind. They dismounted. Boots crunched softly in snow. Inside, Caleb guided Clara behind a thick wooden support beam near the back wall. If they break in, stay low, he instructed. She swallowed. And you, I'll handle it. Her hand caught his sleeve. Caleb. It was the first time she said his name like that. Not formal, not distant, personal. Be careful. Something in his chest tightened again. I plan to be. A heavy bootstep creaked on the porch outside. Then, bang. The door slammed open. Cold air rushed in. Samuel Rourke stepped inside, revolver drawn lazily, eyes scanning. Well now, he drawled. Looks like someone's been squatting. Caleb stepped forward from the shadows, gun already aimed steady at Samuel's chest. Step back outside. Samuel blinked once, surprised. Then slowly smiled. Well, I'll be damned. Elias and Tom moved into the doorway behind him. 3 guns. 1 Marshal. Samuel's gaze flicked to the badge on Caleb's vest. Should have known. Law always sticking its nose where it don't belong. Caleb's voice was ice. You ambushed settlers. Samuel shrugged slightly. Harsh winter. Harsh choices. Behind the beam, Clara's hands trembled. Samuel's eyes shifted slightly, catching the faint movement. His smile widened. And looks like we missed one. Before he could react, a gunshot exploded. Caleb fired first. The bullet tore through Samuel's shoulder, spinning him backward. Chaos erupted. Tom fired wildly, splintering wood. Elias ducked behind the doorway, returning a calculated shot. Caleb grabbed the table and flipped it sideways as cover. Stay down, he shouted to Clara. Gunfire thundered in the small cabin, deafening and violent. Smoke filled the air. Samuel, bleeding but furious, staggered upright outside. Kill him, he roared. Tom rushed forward recklessly. Another shot. Caleb's bullet struck Tom in the thigh, sending him crashing into the snow screaming. Elias dragged his brother back behind cover. The fight paused. Heavy breathing. Snow drifting through the open doorway. Samuel pressed a hand to his wounded shoulder, fury blazing in his eyes. This ain't over, Marshal, he shouted. Caleb's revolver remained steady. Right away. Samuel hesitated. He calculated. 1 wounded brother. Storm still unstable. A marshal who didn't miss. Finally, Samuel spat into the snow. Next time, you won't be so lucky. They mounted quickly, dragging Tom up between them, and rode off into the white horizon. Silence returned, but it felt different, now, fragile. Caleb kept his gun trained on the empty landscape for several long seconds before lowering it. Then he turned. Clara stepped out slowly from behind the beam. Her eyes were wide, not just from fear. From what she had just witnessed. You didn't hesitate, she whispered. They wouldn't have, he replied. She looked at him, really looked at him. Not just as her rescuer, but as a man who would stand between her and death without blinking. You were willing to die, she said softly. Caleb didn't answer right away. Then, yes. The honesty of it hit her harder than the gunfire had. Her voice trembled. Why? He stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw. Close enough to feel the warmth still radiating from him. Because you matter, he said quietly. The words hung between them. Outside, the snow began falling again, softer this time. Clara's eyes filled, not with fear now, with something deeper. You don't even know me. He gave the faintest half smile. I know enough. Her hand slowly reached for his. And this time, he didn't pull away. The truth by firelight. The snow fell softer now. Not violent, not screaming, just steady, as if the mountain itself were listening. Inside the cabin, Caleb shut the door firmly and slid the heavy wooden bolt into place. The silence that followed felt heavier than the gunfight had. Clara was still holding his hand. Neither of them seemed to realize it at first. Then she slowly withdrew her fingers, her cheeks warming from something that had nothing to do with the fire. "You're bleeding," she said suddenly. Caleb glanced down. A shallow graze along his upper arm where a bullet had torn through fabric. "It's nothing. It's not nothing." Her voice carried a firmness he hadn't heard before. She limped toward the small trunk near the wall and found a strip of clean cloth. When she returned, she stood very close. "Sit." He raised a brow. "Yes, ma'am." He lowered himself onto the chair near the fire. She carefully peeled back the torn sleeve of his shirt. Her fingers were still slightly cold, but steady now. "You don't have to play hero every minute," she murmured. "Occupational hazard." She gave him a faint look. "I'm serious." "So am I." Their eyes met. There was no teasing in his gaze now. Just truth. She gently cleaned the wound with warmed water. He didn't flinch. "You could have left after the storm," she said quietly. "You could have ridden down the mountain before they tracked you." "I could have. But you didn't." "No." Silence settled again, but it was no longer fragile. It was full. Clara tied the cloth around his arm carefully. "My father always said you can measure a man by what he does when no one's watching," she said softly. Caleb looked at her. "And what do you see?" She hesitated. "A man who doesn't walk away." The fire cracked between them. Outside, the snow continued its slow descent from the sky. Later that evening, as darkness folded over the mountains again, Clara sat wrapped in a blanket near the hearth. Caleb had rebuilt the fire carefully, smoke controlled. The fight had drained them both. But something else lingered, unspoken. Clara stared into the flames for a long time before speaking. They didn't just attack the wagon for supplies. Caleb, seated across from her cleaning his revolver, paused. "What do you mean?" She swallowed. "My father wasn't just moving us to Silver Ridge to start a farm." He waited. She looked at him, eyes reflecting firelight. He was going to testify. Caleb's gaze sharpened. Testify. In Denver. Against Samuel Rourke. The air shifted instantly. Clara continued, voice low. 2 years ago, Samuel murdered a shopkeeper during a robbery. There were witnesses, but they were too afraid to speak. My father wasn't. Caleb's jaw tightened slowly. He agreed to give a statement to federal court. Quietly. We left Missouri under the excuse of starting over, but we were headed toward officials who would protect us until trial. And someone tipped Rourke off, Caleb finished. She nodded. The ambush wasn't random. The weight of it settled heavily in the cabin. Caleb leaned back slightly, processing. If your father's alive, they'll hunt him, she whispered. Her composure cracked for the first time since the storm. Caleb stood and moved to sit beside her on the floor near the fire. Closer. I didn't find bodies, he reminded her gently. That matters. She closed her eyes briefly. I heard the shot, she whispered. I saw him fall. Caleb didn't offer false comfort. Instead, he spoke steadily. Men have survived worse. She turned toward him slowly. You believe that? I've seen it. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away this time. I don't want to be afraid anymore. You're allowed to be, he said quietly. Just don't let it decide who you are. She studied his face. You talk like someone who's lost something. His eyes flickered, just briefly. I have. What? He hesitated, then answered. My wife. The word hung heavy. 3 winters ago. Fever. I was tracking fugitives in Wyoming when it happened. By the time I got home, she was already buried. Clara's breath caught. I'm so sorry. He nodded once. For a long time, I thought the badge was all I had left. He looked at her. Then I found you in the snow. The firelight danced between them. Neither looked away. You didn't have to come back for me, she whispered. Yes, he said quietly. I did. The words weren't loud, but they were absolute. Her hand found his again. Not out of fear this time, Out of choice. Outside, the wind shifted direction. And somewhere far beyond the cabin, 3 riders regrouped. Samuel Rourke sat stiff in his saddle, shoulder bandaged crudely. His face was pale with rage. "That Marshal thinks this is over," Tom muttered bitterly. Samuel's eyes burned. "No," he said coldly. "It's just begun." Elias looked toward the dark ridge above the cabin. "The pass is unstable." Samuel's lips curled. Exactly. High above the narrow trail leading down the mountain, snow had piled deep and heavy along the cliffs. All it would take was one well-placed shot. An avalanche would bury the cabin, the Marshal, and the girl, without a trace. Samuel adjusted his revolver. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we finish it." Back in the cabin, Clara leaned lightly against Caleb's shoulder as exhaustion finally claimed her. He didn't move away. He let her rest there. Careful, protective, but aware. The storm outside had softened. But something far more dangerous was building. And when morning came, the mountain itself might become their enemy. When the mountain fell, morning came too quietly. That was the first thing Caleb noticed. No howling wind, no cracking branches, no restless shifting of snow. Just silence. The kind that pressed against your ears. He opened his eyes slowly. The fire had burned low, casting a faint orange glow across the cabin. Clara was still leaning against him, asleep, her breathing steady and warm against his shoulder. For a moment, he allowed himself to simply exist there. Alive, with her. Then Ranger whinnied outside, sharp, uneasy. Caleb's body tensed instantly. He gently eased Clara upright. "Clara," he said softly. Her eyes fluttered open. "What is it?" "I don't know yet." But he did. Something was wrong. He moved to the window and wiped away frost. The sky above the ridge was clear, too clear. And then he saw them. Tiny figures silhouetted along the upper pass. 3 riders. Watching. Clara joined him, limping slightly. When she followed his gaze, her breath caught. "They're above us." Caleb's mind calculated quickly. Above. Higher elevation. Unstable snowpack from the storm. Samuel wasn't here for a gunfight. He was here for the mountain. "Get your boots on," Caleb said firmly. Now. Clara didn't argue. Outside, a single gunshot cracked through the still air. It wasn't aimed at the cabin. It was aimed at the ridge. The sound echoed across the valley. For one suspended second, nothing happened. Then, a low rumble. Deep. Growing. Clara's eyes widened. "What is that?" Caleb didn't answer. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the door. The rumble turned into a roar. The mountain split. Snow fractured along the upper cliffs, breaking free in a massive white wall that began racing downward. "Avalanche! Run!" Caleb shouted. They burst from the cabin just as the first wave of snow thundered toward them like a living beast. Ranger reared, panicked. Caleb lifted Clara onto the saddle in one swift motion despite her ankle. "Hold tight." He swung up behind her, kicking the horse hard. The ground trembled violently beneath them. Snow crashed through trees, snapping trunks like matchsticks. The sound was deafening. The cabin behind them disappeared in seconds, swallowed whole. Clara clung to Caleb, terror flooding her veins. "Caleb, I've got you." Snow overtook the trail, chasing them downhill. Ranger leapt over fallen branches, slipping and recovering, muscles straining with desperate strength. The avalanche gained, a white wave swallowing everything in its path. Caleb spotted a narrow rock outcropping ahead, a natural barrier jutting from the mountainside. He steered toward it with everything he had. "Hold your breath," he yelled. They barely reached the rocky edge when the avalanche crashed around them. Snow slammed into the outcropping like ocean surf against stone. The force nearly tore Clara from the saddle. Caleb wrapped both arms around her, shielding her body with his own. Snow buried them waist-deep in seconds. The roar lasted forever. Then, silence. Again. But this time, suffocating. Clara coughed, spitting snow from her mouth. Caleb, she gasped. I'm here. His voice was strained but steady. He forced his arm free and began digging them out. Ranger struggled beneath them, but miraculously remained standing. The rock barrier had saved them. Barely. When they finally freed themselves, the landscape was unrecognizable. The cabin was gone. The trail was gone. The world had changed shape. Clara looked back at the destruction, shaking. They tried to bury us alive. Yes. Her fear slowly transformed into something else. Anger. He killed my father, she whispered, though she still didn't know for sure. And now he wants to erase us. Caleb turned her gently to face him. Look at me. She did. You're still here. His gloved hand brushed snow from her hair. He failed. Her breathing slowed. And he won't stop, she said. No, Caleb agreed. They both understood now. This was no longer just survival. This was war. High above, Samuel Rourke watched from a distance as snow settled over the valley. He smiled coldly. No one walks out of that. But Elias squinted toward the lower ridge. Someone did. Far below, two figures on a dark horse moved slowly through the white terrain. Samuel's smile faded. Impossible. Tom swallowed nervously. He's not normal, Sam. Samuel's jaw hardened. Then we stop fighting him like he is. Down the slope, Caleb guided Ranger carefully through the unstable snow. Clara's hands rested firmly over his. Not trembling now. Steady. You saved me, she said quietly. He didn't answer immediately. I promised, he replied. She turned slightly in the saddle. You can still leave, Caleb. Once we reach town, this isn't your burden. He leaned closer, his voice low and unwavering. You're not a burden. Snowflakes drifted softly around them. And this isn't just your fight anymore. Her heart pounded, not from fear. From him. Why? She whispered again. His jaw tightened slightly as he looked ahead. Because I'm done losing the people I care about. The words struck deep. Clara didn't speak again. Instead, she leaned back against him fully. Trusting. Choosing. The mountain had tried to take them. The outlaws had tried to bury them. But they were still riding. Still breathing. Still together. And somewhere beyond the white horizon, the final confrontation was waiting. The last stand in Silver Ridge. By the time the spires of Silver Ridge appeared through the thinning snowfall, both of them were exhausted, but unbroken. The town sat tucked between pine-covered hills, smoke rising from chimneys, unaware that war was riding straight toward it. Clara's fingers tightened slightly around Caleb's coat as they approached. You think they'll follow us here? She asked quietly. Caleb didn't lie. Yes. Rangers' hooves struck the frozen earth of Main Street. A few townsfolk turned, curious at the sight of a marshal covered in snow with a wounded woman riding in front of him. Caleb dismounted carefully and lifted Clara down as gently as if she were made of glass. But she wasn't glass anymore. The mountain had hardened her. I need the sheriff, Caleb said to a bystander. Sheriff's office is down the street, the man replied. As Caleb helped Clara forward, she noticed something. People watching, whispering, fear spreading before truth had even arrived. Inside the small sheriff's office, Sheriff Wallace, a thick-bearded man with wary eyes, looked up sharply. Marshal Hayes, he said, heard you were tracking the Rourkes. I found them, Caleb replied flatly. Sheriff Wallace glanced at Clara. And this is Clara Whitmore. The sheriff's expression shifted at the name. Whitmore, as in Thomas Whitmore. Clara's breath caught. You know my father. He sent word weeks ago. Said he was coming through here under protection. The room went still. Clara stepped forward, heart hammering. Is he here? Sheriff Wallace hesitated. Your father made it to Silver Ridge 3 days ago. Tears filled her eyes instantly. He's alive. He's injured, the sheriff corrected gently. But alive. Clara's knees nearly gave out from relief. Caleb caught her before she fell. For the first time since the ambush, hope returned fully. But hope never arrives alone. A gunshot cracked outside. Then another. Caleb's head snapped toward the window. Sheriff Wallace swore. "They're here." Through the glass, riders stormed into town, Samuel Rourke at the front, shoulder bandaged but eyes burning with fury. Panic erupted along Main Street. "Get her somewhere safe," Caleb ordered. Clara shook her head. "No." He looked at her sharply. "They're here because of me. I won't hide." He saw it then. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. "Then stay behind me," he said. They stepped outside together. Snow drifted lightly around them. Samuel dismounted slowly, revolver spinning once before settling in his grip. "Well, Marshal," he called mockingly. "You're harder to kill than most." Caleb stood firm. "It's over, Samuel." Samuel laughed coldly. "You think this town's going to stand against me?" Behind Caleb, townsmen began stepping out of doorways. Armed, not fearless, but unwilling to back down. Sheriff Wallace joined Caleb's side. "You brought your fight to the wrong place," the sheriff said. Samuel's eyes flicked to Clara. "You should have stayed buried, girl." Clara stepped forward just enough to be seen. "My father's alive," she said, voice steady. Samuel's smile faltered. "Not for long." He raised his revolver. Everything happened at once. Caleb fired first. The bullet struck Samuel's wounded shoulder, spinning him sideways. Elias shot toward the rooftops. Townsmen returned fire. Tom tried to mount his horse but was knocked down by a well-placed shot from the sheriff. Gunfire thundered across Main Street. Snow kicked up in bursts. Caleb moved like a man with nothing left to lose. He advanced steadily, firing with precision. Elias fell near the water trough. Tom dropped moments later. Samuel staggered backward, clutching his bleeding shoulder, fury twisting his face. "You should have let it go," Samuel snarled. Caleb stopped a few feet away. "You ambushed families." Samuel smirked weakly. "That's the West." "No," Caleb said firmly. "That's you." Samuel lunged with one last desperate shot. Caleb fired. Silence fell as Samuel Rourke collapsed into the snow. The storm was over. For good. Clara stood frozen for a moment as the weight of it all settled. The mountain, the cabin, the avalanche, the town. Then she ran to Caleb. He turned just in time before she wrapped her arms around him. He held her tightly, not out of protection now, but because he needed to. "You're safe," he whispered. She pulled back slightly, eyes shining. "So are you." Behind them, the town slowly exhaled. Sheriff Wallace approached quietly. "Your father's asking for you." Clara looked at Caleb. "Come with me." He hesitated, then nodded. Inside a small upstairs room of the general store, Thomas Whitmore lay propped up in bed, pale but alive. When Clara entered, he smiled weakly. "My brave girl." She fell beside him, tears falling freely. "I thought I lost you." "You didn't," he said softly. His eyes lifted to Caleb. "And you must be the man who didn't walk away." Caleb gave a slight nod. "Yes, sir." Thomas studied him carefully. "Thank you." Caleb shook his head gently. "She saved herself long before I arrived." Clara looked between them, and something inside her shifted. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and painted the sky gold, Clara stood beside Caleb outside the town. "You'll leave now," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. He looked toward the horizon. "That's what I do." She nodded slowly, then stepped closer. "You don't have to." He met her eyes. The walls he had built over 3 winters cracked. "I don't know how to stay," he admitted. She took his hand gently. "Then learn." The wind was soft now. No storm, no gunfire, just possibility. Caleb looked back at Silver Ridge, then at Clara, a woman who had survived the mountain, faced down outlaws, and chosen courage. "I'm done riding alone," he said finally. Her breath caught. "You're staying?" He nodded once. "If you'll have me." She smiled. "Not fragile now. Strong." I was hoping you would. Snow began falling again, gentle this time. Not deadly, not cruel, just soft. And as the sun disappeared behind the peaks, Caleb Hayes removed the badge from his vest and looked at it thoughtfully. Then he slipped it back on. Not as a man running from loss, but as a man who had found something worth protecting again. And this time, he wasn't walking away.